very, very passionate speech. What a great way to start our conference today. We're going to be having our first panel now on women's resistance, the veil, and religious morality. And to chair that panel, we've invited Laurie Gaylor, who is co-president of the Freedom from Religious Foundation. Until 2015, she was also the editor of the organization's newspaper, Free Thought Today. In 2010, she received the Humanitarian Heroine Award from the American Humanist Association, and currently she's on the Speakers Bureau of the Secular Student Alliance. So can we give a big round of applause to our first panel? Thank you.
Are we missing two people? Jamila, is she here? And Sadia is en route. And Jamila, do we have her? I guess we'll just start. Well, good morning. I was at that hotel where we lost a lot of sleep last night. And Dan was sleepy, but he joked, well, what can you expect with all these on-fire activists? I'm going to introduce the speakers quickly and then get to the panel. From on my right, and I didn't get a chance to talk privately. Is it Ani?
Yes, that's Ani. Yeah.
Similar to mine. Ani Zonneveld,
Yes.
who is founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values. She has affiliates in 12 countries and 19 cities. A contributor to Huffington Post, Open Democracy, and Al Jazeera. She recently gave a TED Talk, Islam as American as Apple Pie. She's also a singer-songwriter. She was born and raised Muslim in Malaysia and is based now in Los Angeles. And then Hamila.
Halima.
Say it again.
Halima.
Begum is an ex-Muslim activist and blogger after a 10-year journey from Sunni and Shia Islamism to secular liberalism. Her dissertation on British ex-Muslims won the Best Dissertation Award at Birkbeck University in 2014. She writes for feminist publications and wants to help others live freely and be true to themselves. Rahila,
I'm sorry.
That's
I'm out of order here. Yasmin Rehman is a doctoral candidate whose areas of research is polygamy and the law. She's worked for nearly 2 decades against violence against women in various capacities in local government, police service, holding the deputy national lead on forced marriage and honor violence. She's a founding CEO of a race equality charity in East London and is a member of the Center for Secular Space. That's a nice name. And am I saying this right? Rahila Gupta is a freelance journalist whose writings have appeared in The Guardian. She's written several books, including From Homebreakers to Jailbreakers, Southall Black Sisters, and co-authored a book with Beatrix Campbell, Why Doesn't Patriarchy Die? And if Jamila joins us later, she was born to a Greek Cypriot mother, Algerian father. They were both scientists. She was brought up in Algeria and fled to Paris after death threats by the Front Islamique, has fought oppression of Algerian women, earned 2 master's degrees, and in 2012 received Le Prix International de la Laïcité. And finally, if Sadia makes it, she is a Canadian-born British installation artist and record producer whose work has been sequenced to major film and TV companies and screened around the world. She has a master's from Birkbeck University and was born to a Pakistani Muslim father and is an atheist ex-Muslim. So we have a fascinating panel, and we'll get with it. And I'm going to ask the same question of each of you, starting with Ani. what is the greatest threat to women's freedom, or serious threat from the Muslim religion in your country or country of origin or ancestry, if that is relevant, specifically policies, laws, or practices?
I'd like to probably flip the question a little bit, is what is the greatest threat to patriarchy? And in Malaysia, it is the progressive and the free thinkers and liberal Muslims, and we have actually been defined as a threat to national security by the Prime Minister of Malaysia, who perpetuates this notion that Malaysia is a moderate Muslim country, which is really furthest from the truth. And in the United States, for example, we have the threat to Muslim rights. It is obvious it's the women who in hijabis, they're constantly being attacked and harassed, physical assaults, which is really unfortunate. I think that happens a lot in the West as well for hijabi wearing women. But I think one of the threats for women's freedom, whether you're Muslim or not, whether you're straight or LGBT, is the issue of forced marriages. If you are a lesbian, you are forced into marriage. And so in America, for example, we are addressing the issue of child marriage. In the state of California, which is where I live, there is no age limit, a mandatory age limit of 18 for marriage for girls. So you have young girls being married off, whether you're Muslim or Pentecostal. There's a lot of conservative Jewish and Christian sects also that use this loophole to force their child into marriage. So we have a lot going against us, especially with the Trump era, Trump election. A lot of our women's rights have been curtailed. Women's reproductive rights, for example. So actually, if you were going to look all over the map, all over the world, women's rights is in dire straits. I think that in encountering a lot of the patriarchy, which is the structure from which all this misogynistic and discriminating practices are still rampant, and like this book title, which I think is fantastic by our last panel there, I think it's important that it's the women who become empowered religiously. And I know there was sort of a negative comment yesterday about women imam. I am a women imam, and I'm proud to call myself a women imam. That's because my community in the progressive community have chosen me as an imam. And I think the fact that women imams are popping up all over the world, particularly in the West, where you have the freedom to practice your religion the way you want it, rather than what the state defines your practice. And the fact that women imams are popping up is challenging patriarchy. We're challenging the status quo. We are actually saying, you know what, we have the equal spiritual, egalitarian right as men do. And that is actually scaring the shit out of them. So this is what is the dynamics of how, like Ina was alluding to earlier, that we have to also, and I appreciate her recognizing that there are religious people of faith working to change the system within, and that's what progressive Muslims are doing.
Hi, so I'm Halima. It's my first time talking at a conference, so if I stutter a bit, forgive me. Okay, so being British born, obviously my heritage is Bangladeshi though, from my parents are from there. And I'm obviously ex-Muslim residing in the UK, so my experience of how religion impacts us is going to be how it is in this country, too, and also specific to ex-Muslim women because of how it's impacted me. So I think, in my experience, the religion wants to control women, our minds, our bodies, our behaviour and our choices. So the main thing at risk is our autonomy. How is this done? Well, in my opinion, it's primarily done through the family and relatives. And by relatives, I mean the community, which often people conflate in other words, but for me, it's the community, the relatives here. Because they're the ones that put pressure on the families and parents to control the daughters, or fear ostracism if they don't control the daughters. Religion often helps them to identify as disobedient women and that were deviants, and helps to maintain their power and social control. So this is often deployed through policing our bodies. In my case, I used to wear the hijab, and it was only I'm 31, 6 years ago that I actually took it off properly and told my parents, but only over a year ago I came out to them that I don't believe in God and everything as well. So yeah, I journaled about hijab a while back, and I think if I just say what I thought back, then it explains it, because I don't wear it now, so it's in the past. I said, I cannot wear the hijab because it means more than a headscarf. I despise it for many reasons, such as the fact that I am perceived as a sexual object requiring covering. I cannot for the life of me separate the cloth from all the symbols and representation that it comes with. I cannot wear a hijab because it reminds me of dark days when I was trapped, and I promised myself I would never go back into that cocoon again. The hijab comes with expectations and a strict code of behavior. The hijab incapacitates my ability as a woman to be seen as a human being, to be on an equal standing with a man. The hijab restricts my movement. It makes me hide and feel incapable of socializing in public, and often with men as well, without guilt or dishonor. The hijab removes my femininity, dismisses my aspirations and desires as a woman. It mutilates my sexuality and makes me feel like a sex object and completely worthless. I wrote that about 5 years ago. Anyway, so that kind of explains how I see what is like one of the main problems for us. I guess to further that a bit, as an ex-Muslim woman, I think we're often treated as deviants, because if you look at a spectrum of religiosity and within a family, religious identity is the privileged place to be, and it's the normative one. So if you're irreligious, then your religious identity is non-normative and has negative attributes. So I think being a woman, then it's a double whammy, because you are further stigmatized because of your body policing as well as the visibility of Islam on your bodies. So how resisting? Well, I think many of us have long-term struggles to remove ourselves from the destructive forces of patriarchal Islam. For example, the stigma of removing hijab is never ever discussed when it's so huge. What happens is that once a woman wears it, she can then reluctantly find herself in a position where she's actually bound by these higher standards of piety and modesty. So when she takes it off, it's even worse. That was my case. Like my mum told me, if you never wore it, it's okay, but you wore it, you cannot take it off now. So the way they saw me is almost like this hijab girl, and you know, it's completely different. I can't explain how much this piece of cloth is not just a cloth, it's symbolic and representative. So I guess in my case, I had to wean my parents off, took the hijab off, took the jilbab off, and then slowly had to wean them off it. I also just studied ex-Muslims, and in terms of the women there particularly, I found that a lot of them, they're resisting in different ways. Obviously, a lot of them are trying to speak out. Once they're financially capable, they're moving out of homes. I think them going into education helps them to kind of, I guess, break away from the family. But a lot of them are often living at home and doing performances. They live double lives. It's not nice, it's not great, but this is what they have to do to survive at the moment. I think many of them go through intricate kind of like pretenses to do that. I guess the other thing that they're doing is those forming communities such as the Council of Ex-Muslims, and there are other grassroots ex-Muslim organizations, and you know, to find people like them to resist in collective. Sorry, went a bit long there.
Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I think some of the responses have already been covered, but I think one of the greatest threats to women's rights from Muslims is the normalization of fundamentalist, conservative, extremist interpretations of Islam. And alongside that, the normalization of it, where are the images of non-hijabbed women? Where are those spaces for women from within the communities to actually be able to dissent? I've heard some of, I followed some of what was going on yesterday on live stream, and I often get asked, why do you go into these spaces? And I have to say the Council of Ex-Muslims, the One Law for All Coalition, is one of the few spaces where those of us who resist from within can find a space to speak out and to speak out freely. The normalization is infecting every aspect of our lives, whether it be through faith schools, whether it be through faith-based resolutions to any form of health problems that women may have, mental health. You should go and see your imam, go and get some sort of talisman. You know, you will be, you will seek resolution through those. Our political representatives who I think are playing almost a duplicitous role in terms of not wanting to upset their voter banks and therefore not challenging extremist, fundamentalist interpretations of religion publicly. Privately, they may say something different. And that means that not just from within communities do you get that reinforcement, but you also get that reinforcement as a Muslim woman from outside. When the government is standing up and saying, you know, the state is supporting 4-year-olds wearing hijabs, as Gina talked about yesterday, when Muslim women are directed towards parallel legal systems, as Pragna also talked about yesterday. And all of this dressed up, as it is within faith groups, but also outside of faith groups, in the language of choice, that women have a choice and women are exercising a choice. What about the context in which that choice is being exercised? What are the consequences? That's a question that none of us ask. What are the consequences of exercising a different choice? Of removing the hijab, as Halima has said, of dressing in a way that some may consider outside of community norms, of choosing a marriage partner, of choosing a career, of choosing an education. It can be ostracism at one level, which is incredibly psychologically and emotionally draining and damaging, to murder at the other extreme, when we look at what happens in terms of the numbers of deaths of women, whether that's justified by religion or whether it sits outside of it. I think we need to be having more conversations and really challenging conversations, not just in these spaces where we will all have to put up with a level of discomfort, whether we're listening to believers or non-believers, but being able to challenge each other and do that respectfully, but not imposing any one set of ideas on anyone else. And it's this normalization. I do not recognize the Islam that's practiced. As someone who has been raised and still part of that community group, I do not recognize this Islam. That's right. That's not to say that there are things within the text that do not justify some of the most heinous abuses of people based on their sexuality, based on their gender, based on their desire to leave a religion or to stay within it and practice it in their own way. But how do you challenge religious groups that have political power, that are in every single institution, whether it be the government, whether it be in education or health or wherever else? And it's this silencing of any dissent within, as you're not an authentic, not a good Muslim, and without, as you're Islamophobic, you're racist if you challenge things. It's a really difficult line, and it's a line that some of us who are still within the community have to try and walk every single day.
Thank you.
Thank you. After all the horror stories that we heard yesterday about death threats, killings, brutalization of frontline activists, I have the incredible privilege to bring to you a story of hope, of inspiration, of a model of resistance that we could do well to emulate. And the place that I'm talking about is Rojava. I want people to put up their hands. I want to know who, not so much applaud, but I want to know how many people have heard of Rojava, and not the people who have heard me speak. Not the people who have heard me speak about it. Okay, well, I mean, this is just, an indicator of the level of unawareness of this place, which is in the northernmost strip of Syria, in the middle of a war zone. There is the most incredible experiment going on of a secular society built on direct democracy with women in the driving seat. And hardly anybody has heard about this. When you have journalists from here go to that part of the world, they're only interested in the battle lines, in the women who are, fighting that battle against ISIS, which is an amazing battle. And I'll come to that in a minute, but what I want to start off with is to say that this is the only part in Syria where there are no Sharia courts. They have been disbanded under... So under Assad, that is in all the regions where Assad reigns supreme, you still have Sharia courts. The regions that are held by the Syrian rebels, and of course, as you would expect, in the ISIS areas, there are Sharia courts. And from 2014, when the Women's Ministry was set up, there has been the most incredible assault on patriarchal practices in terms of the changes in the law. So, for example, child marriage, forced marriage, polygamy, honor crimes, discrimination against women, all of these have been criminalized. A woman's testimony is equal to that of a man's. Women have the right, and regardless of marital status, which is a hugely radical thing, they have the right to custody of their children. And all marriage certificates are issued in civil courts. So this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of the legal framework that they have brought about. And some of the women who are fighting violence against women, because of course patriarchy doesn't end overnight, as we all know, these women have said that since the laws have been introduced, they've found that there's been a 50% fall in the violence that women face, or the cases that have come to them. So the way, and I think it's important just to say a little bit about the way in which this direct democracy works. So neighborhoods form into communes, and each of these communes is led on the co-presidentship principle, which is led by a man and a woman. And each of these there are committees to deal with health, to deal with conflict resolution, and each of these committees is again represented and led by one man and one woman, and so on and so forth up to the city and the regional levels. Additionally, to this structure, which begins from the bottom up, this direct democracy experiment, you have, amazingly, a parallel structure of women only. So the same network of communes and then a city and regional level administrations are run by women only, and they have the power of veto over anything that they see as detrimental to women. And every institution you care to name, whether it is schools, whether it is the police, and the army, and I think that's the only bit that we might have seen in the West, is, the sexy images of Kurdish women with their guns. But where, this is the society from which these women come. And as much training as they are given to how to wield a gun, they are given training on the ideology behind it. The idea is about ending patriarchy. So women soldiers that I spoke to when I visited Rojava, she said, when I tried to find out if she'd ever shot an ISIS soldier, she said, that's not the important thing. For me, the important thing is to kill the ideology, not the human being. And that is such a clear sense for the people in Rojava. And they have, it's a completely clear-sighted thing. Religion belongs in your heart and your homes, not in the public square, not where policy is concerned. And this is underpinned by Abdullah Öcalan's philosophy, and where he talks about the three sexual rupture theory of women's liberation. And so the first sexual rupture occurred, according to him, at the end of Neolithic times and the rise of statist civilization. The second rupture was with the beginnings of religion, which entrenched patriarchal oppression of women. And he says that treating women as inferior now became the sacred command of God. And the third sexual rupture is to come, and that is the end of patriarchy, or as he puts it, killing the dominant male. That's not about killing men, but it's about killing the mindset, which is a problem for both men and for women.
I'm going to go
And
to the
just
second.
one last thing, sorry, I haven't finished. And I just wanted to say, because the title of this talk was also about Wales, I just wanted to say that it's a very rural area, this part, so it's quite conservative. But I have to say, I did not see a single woman wearing a face veil or niqab or burqa. There were women wearing the hijab. In some cases, it was religious practice. In some cases, it was cultural practice. Obviously, it's not the end of the story, but the women there are making a really good stab, and I think we need to find ways of showing solidarity and of making sure that this revolution does not end, and it is a very fragile revolution for many reasons that I can't go into right now, but thank you.
So that's a good segue for my next question. Should Western countries ban the burqa as opposed to the burkini? And Halima talked about experience with the veil or hijab. If you have experience and want to talk about that too, please do.
What was the last
Just
part
been
of that?
joined by Sadia.
If you have any, if you've worn the veil or hijab and want to talk about that experience, you're welcome to do that too.
Okay, so should Western countries ban the burqa? Absolutely. Like most Muslim majority countries have banned the burqa, so I don't see why that should not be banned here in Western states as well. That said, Muslims for Progressive Values will fight anyone who wants to wear the burqa in the context of Islam. If you're going to wear the burqa justifying as an Islamic context, then we will fight you on that. But if you're going to wear the burqa or not wear the burqa or go naked, what have you, in the name of secular law, then we will defend your right to do so. So that's the premises from which we identify this burqa issue, whether it's a secular justification or religious. If it's religious, then we'll fight you on it. No basis for it.
I kind of mentioned already about hijab and how it impacted me. I guess the thing is, in terms of the burqa, when I think of the burqa, I'm thinking the niqab, the face veil. I don't actually support a full ban. I do think there should be a partial ban, though, in terms of, I don't think outright banning any kind of physical kind of covering is good. I think it infringes on our personal autonomy. But I think for security purposes, like if you're going to airports or in banks, I think people should remove the facial covering because that's essential. And also in education kind of setting.
Schools.
Yeah, schools. So if you're teaching kids, adults, you shouldn't really wear it there. So I think there should be certain areas where it should be banned based on your job and obviously with a secular ethos. But an outright banning anyone to wear face covering is wrong. Like with the bikini, I did think actually, I didn't like that was banned in France because my reason for this is that it defeats its own purpose by isolating marginalised women who probably only can go out swimming with a bikini. I mean, mind you, I don't know how to swim, by the way, because Muslim girls aren't taught how to swim much. So, I mean, I don't know if that was me back then. If I were able to wear a bikini and go out, then maybe that would be a possibility. So I don't think I would infringe on their right to do that. However, obviously, whether they should be wearing a burqa or not is another case, and that's a different debate. So don't have any more on that.
Yasmin.
I'm going to quote Monel Tahawi from her book Hymens and Headscarves, and she says that we've got to end this obsession with what Muslim women wear on their heads and what is between their legs. I haven't made my mind up. I think I'm probably more where Annie is. My mother would take a different view. She would happily take on the role of removing women's headscarves. I think there are far, far greater issues at stake. And when we're talking about women's liberation and women's oppression, I think we need to remember that we need to be focusing on the men. I think we need to be challenging men's behaviour and what the men in the communities are doing in terms of enforcing the wearing of hijabs, certainly making it clear that there is no space for either segregation or the imposition of religious dress codes on children in any public space. I think that's absolutely important. But I think if we need to be directing our energy towards the men in the community and those women who stand alongside those men enforcing these dress codes. I know that's a bit of a politician's answer, but it's where I am at this time.
Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, my train was running late. I don't think that religion has any place in secular life. And I think that the niqab and the burqa should be banned. As a society and as a civilization, I think that we need to take a stand against the ideology that these garments represent, the ridiculous notion that women should be considered responsible for a man's sexual arousal. Here's the thing. If you have a problem with my hair or my arms or legs or any part of my anatomy, tough. I do not understand why women even pay lip service to the idea of covering their hair. It is the equivalent of saying that women who are raped are asking for it by how they dress. Well, fuck your modesty and fuck your morals.
Okay, well, I'm going to take the opposing point of view. I don't think that we should ban the burqa in the West. I disagree with the burqa for all the reasons that you've identified. But I think it would be counterproductive, because how many of us will say that as we were growing up, we didn't see that many Muslim women adopting the hijab or wearing the burqa. It is a growing fact, and I believe that this is a response partly to the racism of, the Muslim communities in the West are embattled communities. We have to have a slightly nuanced position. And if we want women to give up the burqa and we want women to give up the hijab, then I think it would be counterproductive to ban it. We've seen this in France, where women then adopt it in greater numbers as a form of pride, as a form of their badge of honor as proud and out Muslims. And I think that that's counterproductive. So I would disagree. I mean, I feel what it should be is it should be open to debate. I think that's a real problem. Years ago, I wrote a piece on this saying that the burqa is a cloth that has come soaked in blood, because Muslim sisters in the West who insist on their right to wear the hijab and who see this as some sort of freedom, do not lend their support or solidarity to women in Afghanistan or to women in Iran who've had acid flung in their faces or have had death threats or been killed for not wearing the hijab. So I think that kind of debate we should be allowed to have, we should have it, and I feel that there is a kind of identity politics in the West which doesn't allow you to talk about it unless you're a Muslim, and that I disagree with. When I've spoken about this in the past, I've had white women come up to me and say, oh, thank God you raised this issue, because we would like to talk about it, but we feel that we would be accused of racism. What they don't understand, they think my brown skin lends me authenticity, but only in the West, because in the Indian context, I am nominally a Hindu with a historic oppression of Muslims. So if I was making that statement in India, I probably would also be criticized roundly for doing that. So, but anyway, I think that it's something that we have to debate against and reduce. I think if there was an organic, if Muslim women were allowed to feel comfortable in the West and the community felt comfortable, I think there would be, in time, they would reduce the wearing of the burqa or the hijab.
So we have a little extra time. Ani or anyone else, would you like to have a little dialogue on this issue?
I'd like to add a little bit more to that, though. There is the ex-mufti of Al-Azhar University, which is a prominent Sunni institution, educational institution based out of Cairo. about 2 years ago, put out a video stating that Muslim women who don't wear hijabs are apostates, and which is really appalling. Now, even the issue of an apostate, it's a mute issue in Islam in the context of the Quran. We talked about a lot about apostasy yesterday, but actually it has nothing to do with Islam. It's actually a political tool. And so you've got the Al-Azhar, which is basically a very conservative institution that feeds a lot of the misogynistic interpretations of Islam, which has become the norm, and in partnership with Saudi Arabia. But on the other hand, the positive change has been that the highest religious authorities of Morocco have come out with a position just in February this year stating that apostasy has nothing to do with Islam, but it is a political tool. So here you have Al-Azhar University equating not wearing hijab for women as apostates, and here you have the Moroccan religious authorities debunking the whole concept of apostasy in Islam in itself. So that's the nuance, and this is the theological and ideological debate and fight that's going on in the Muslim world. And it's unfortunate that hardly anybody has heard about the religious authorities' decision in Morocco, and this is actually an earthquake in the Muslim world. But the Muslim world, the politicians do not want anyone to know about it, because that's going to undermine their whole political basis of controlling free thinkers, progressive Muslims, anyone that's going to challenge their definition of Islam. And it's interesting how apostasy in Al-Azhar context is equated to hijab as a way to control women.
Can I?
Can I just?
I think we'll get back to you. Go ahead.
I don't know, I find it really difficult to understand how apostasy is not to do with Islam, the scripture, and is a political tool. Yes, it is obviously, the scriptures do see it as treason, even in the hadith, that's what they say, but it is quite clear that apostasy is punishable by death.
No, it's not. It doesn't say that in the Quran at all.
Not in the Quran, in the hadith.
Well, okay, but that's a political system, right? That's a man-made construct.
Yeah, but I think if most Sunni Muslims will probably follow the Quran and Sunnah, so they follow that whole doctrine, and if you're whichever school of thought you follow, then whether you're Hanafi, Shia, Maliki, you'll still believe in that. So, I like that there's difference and nuances, and hopefully there's more ijtihad to change that. But currently, the predominant view is that in Islam, apostates get killed, and that's what we face.
Yeah, no, but that's the problem.
It is a problem, of course.
That's the problem, yes.
It is a problem. I think it's important to change that discourse, and I hope we will. And I think there's something I hope I can point out now, is that I do find often the discussions around reform of Islam, which is great, but I think one point has to be thought about is that do Muslims who believe in reform actually think that the Quran is fallible or infallible? If they think it's fallible, then there's so much we can do about that. But if you do think the scripture is infallible, I see it's very difficult to have any progress with that. So, I do think that's important to raise there. And also, just the other thing is also about burqas and bikinis. I think, just want to clarify that for kids, that's never a good thing. So, definitely don't agree with that.
Any other comments on the burqa here?
Yeah. I totally agree with what Sadia said, and a few years ago that would have been my position of let's just ban the burqa. But then I wonder, where do we then go? Do we start saying we're going to ban beards on Muslim men? But what if you're a hipster? Are you allowed to keep your beard or you're not? And I think what Rahila says is really important, is that we need to have a debate around Islamist ideology, about religion in public spaces, religion in our institutions across the board, not just where Islam is concerned. And we all need to be engaging in that debate. It's not just about Muslim men and women talking about Muslim ideology, but absolutely everyone, because we all have a stake in it. We all have a stake in what happens on these shores, but also elsewhere. And that point about what happens to women overseas, I just wanted to relay a story from my own work. I was in Pakistan almost 10 years ago at a university talking to some women about leadership and empowerment and development. And the women were really angry, incredibly angry. These are middle class, upper class women who are all sort of master students who want to go out and change the country that they live in, as many of us have wanted to do. And they were really attacking the women in the West who were adopting the burqa and saying that this is having an impact on our lives. Our mothers fought not to wear it, and we are now being forced into it. And a lot of us who don't wear the burqa never have done, apart from 3 weeks in the early 90s, but that's another story. We'll remember growing up and having to wear traditional dress, having to wear shalwar kameez going to school, or when it was a non-uniform day, mum or auntie saying, why don't you wear a sari because you look really lovely and you never get to wear one. We've got to be really careful, but if on one hand we're talking about liberating women and yet we make that piece of cloth overtake the whole debate about fundamental extremist ideology, then aren't we reinforcing the oppression of those women within those communities? Yeah. I think what Rahila said is so important.
Well, I disagree.
That's fine.
I think that it's ridiculous that women should be walking around in shrouds in the dark in the 21st century. I think that we don't tolerate people wearing shackles in the streets, and I don't think that we should have this garment on our streets if we're going to call ourselves a civilized society. So that's my position. I understand that people are looking for tolerance, but I think that part of the problem here is that we're starting to tolerate things that should not be tolerated. And I think that there has to be a place to draw a line, and I don't think that you can equate wearing beards with walking around in the dark.
I wasn't equating the two, but...
and, well, what are we going to do, ban beards? So I don't think that you can do that. I think that it's much more serious. I think that, as I said, we don't tolerate people walking around in shackles. There's no reason to tolerate women walking around in the burqa.
Gupta, final remarks on this.
Okay, I think shackles used to be quite fashionable with the punk lobby, and I don't think we stopped that, but anyway. Basically, I just want to clarify what I was saying. It's very clear-cut when women are being forced to wear the hijab by their community, their society, their fathers, their family. There's no confusion around that should be opposed. What I'm talking about is where more and more Muslim women have adopted the hijab as a so-called choice in opposition to what they see as racism, as victimization as Muslims, and that's what I'm talking about. And if we want fewer women to wear it, I don't think banning it is the answer, because that's counterproductive. I know that some people have said that in France, in a small number of cases, and it's hard to know how many this is affected, that actually young girls who wanted not to wear the hijab were able to use the law in arguments with their families to say it's banned, so therefore we can't wear it. So it did give them some sort of fallback. So I can see that there are some positives, but I do think that on the whole, it's the women who are choosing to wear it. That to me is the real tragedy, that why are they privileging their race identity over their gender identity? Why do they have to use, sort of a sexist form of dress in order to show themselves to be out and proud Muslims? And that's, for me, the thing that we need to tackle. The other stuff is easy for us to oppose because, we're here talking about patriarchal oppression and we're all opposed to that. So, but I think it's when women choose to wear it. How do we deal with that? Banning is not the answer.
Yeah.
So a final formal question before we open it up to the audience, and that is, how do we fight this idea that discrimination based on religion should get a pass, that it's imperialist to champion women's rights for Muslim women?
Start on the other end and
All right.
Thanks.
Sorry, I
I'm
was not paying attention because I thought you're starting at
How do we fight the idea that it's imperialist to champion women's rights for Muslim women, or that discrimination based on religion should get a pass?
Well, certainly not. I don't think discrimination based on religion should get a pass. No, I totally disagree with that. And I think it's very easy to condemn imperial powers that invade Afghanistan in the name of women's rights. What becomes much harder to do is women who are sort of fellow travelers who refuse to condemn the situation that women find themselves in terms of religious oppression, because they see that as racist and imperialist. And I think that really is a huge problem for me.
I find collusion with the oppression of Muslim women in the name of political correctness really terrifying. And I point here again to the notion of the veil, that there are women who collaborate in the oppression of their sisters, who seek justification for parallel lives and parallel judicial systems. Muslim women's rights are human rights. It doesn't matter what race or color you are. We champion human rights because it's the right thing to do. It's the honorable thing to do, and it doesn't matter who you are. So I think that I think I just lost my train of thought. Pick it up.
I completely agree with Sadia. I'm just so fed up on so many levels, but as part of the One Law for All campaign and challenging parallel legal systems and Sharia courts, I've become really discouraged, disappointed, angered by those women's organisations that say actually Muslim women deserve less. They don't deserve the protection of the state in the way that other women do. That if they have an issue, then we'll leave it to those courts because actually we don't want to upset the Muslim men. That's the narrative behind all of that. I'm a secularist. I'm a women's human rights activist. We need to remove religion from all political institutions. I really, really do believe that. And that's not denying people the right to practice their beliefs. It's absolutely what Ina was saying in her speech. So we've got to get to this point where everyone's rights matter, as you say. Muslim women are women too and deserve the same as their non-Muslim sisters, the same access to justice, the same access to education, the same access to economic empowerment. We're all sharing increasingly limited resources. We've got to find a way of being better together. And in terms of framing human rights within this notion that they're Western, I think Pragna covered that yesterday. But what I will say is following on from what Rahila said about entering Muslim majority countries on this premise of protecting the women, the fact that these same governments that profess to want to be protecting Muslim women are now sitting down with the Taliban again, I think speaks volumes. But also there needs to be a bit more openness from Muslim communities themselves of when they challenge the West using those same standards for Muslim countries too. The silence, the deafening silence about what the Saudis are perpetrating in the Yemen is shocking. There's got to be an end to the double standards.
To be honest, I agree with all of what they say, but just to add, I think on a macro level, we do have to consider dismantling religious privilege, because for long as we have that, people always give religion a pass, whether it's Islam or Christianity or any other religion. So working with secular organisations like the NSS, I think we need to try to dismantle religious privilege. Aside that, I do agree that women's rights are not a Western concept. Why is it a Western concept? And I think to those people, we have to remind them that of the racism of lowered expectations. why are we different? Why are brown girls not cared for as much? I mean, often I hear the example of FGM. If that happened to white girls, they would be up in arms. I mean, I think even going back to the situation of the Rotterdam case with the young white girls that were abused by the Asian man there. I mean, it's horrific, and I'm glad that's been out and it's open, and that, they obviously brought justice to those girls. However, I wonder how many Asian girls are also going through that within those Asian family households or within those Muslim households potentially. And, is that being ignored? Is it because, again, it's a religious issue? They're just discriminating because they don't want to get in there because it's a bit tricky? I don't know. So I think it is racism. That is why they tend to give religion a pass.
So I actually have a question. So what's up with the non-Muslim women donning hijab on hijab days? What's up with that? I mean, seriously. And these are feminists, supposedly. I think the issue of misogyny, homophobia, and just a lot of xenophobia, all sorts of discriminatory belief system, we all have to fight these issues together. I mean, this whole imperialistic notion that if you're a white, for example, you cannot be speaking up for women's rights or Muslim women's rights and what have you. I'm a straight person. I'm a hardcore defender of LGBT rights, and I think that these are intersectional issues, and we all have to be working together. I think, Ina, you really said it nicely, and I really appreciate the framing of our conversation of being inclusive. But I think there's a real ignorance, and I think this has been touched on yesterday as well. There's a real ignorance about religion. There's a lot of assumptions, false assumptions. At the United Nations, which we do a lot of work, Muslims for Progressive Values, we challenge human rights abuses in the name of Sharia law by Muslim majority countries. So when they say, child marriage or FGM is Islam, well, we go in there and we actually give them a counter-religious narrative. For the non-Muslim states, they actually, it's a shock to their system because they don't actually know how to challenge Muslim-majority countries. The UN doesn't know how to challenge Muslim-majority countries on their human rights abuses in the name of religion. So it takes a Muslim organization, such as Muslims for Progressive Values, to go in there and to challenge those narratives. It doesn't work with a secular organization, does it? And so that's the way we undermine the human rights abuses, and that's how we challenge the human rights abuses. Now, if you want to challenge human rights abuses in the name of religion, and whatever religion it is, this is the approach we do. Demonizing religion does not work. But being a Muslim, a practicing Muslim, a believer, for that matter, challenging them really undermines and turns their narrative on its head. And that's the success that we've seen. And what we've also seen is member states, secular states, have taken our narrative, our inclusive human rights Islamic language, yes, there is such a language, but that's been buried, and taking it to the ground to actually educate civil societies on the ground, Muslims and non-Muslims, human rights defenders. So that's the positive hope that's happening, that we should all be informed about as we work together towards undermining patriarchy as a concept.
Thank you.
Just got one small point. I just wanted to say one thing very quickly, and that is this binary of if you're secular, you're anti-religious, and that you can't be religious and secular. It's false. You can be both.
Yeah.
As Annie said, we've got to be aware of the intersections, and that just because you have a faith does not mean that you do not want to live in a secular state where religion doesn't have the hold that it currently holds. And that's just the point that I wanted to make. Yeah.
Thank you. So we want to take some questions from you, but I'm going to have some ground rules. No more than 1 minute. If you want to make a comment, fine, but we hope you'll end it with a question, and I will cut you off. So I can't really see, so you pick.
Very, very quick. I am Cinzia Asciutto from Italy. I have a question for Annie. I'm not sure I really understood what you said about the secular justification and the religious justification for the burqa. You mentioned this difference, but I'm not sure I understood what you really mean. Thank you.
Do you want to take more questions?
No, I think
okay. It's very easy. So I'll give you an example. In the state of Florida, burqa is banned. I mean, it's in the United States. It's not legal. But it's also a gray area. So, for example, in the state of Florida, for you to get a driver's license, you have to have an image of your face, and that's sort of standard, right? So this woman wanted to have her Florida driver's license with her burqa on, so she actually went to court, and she was actually defended by a Muslim civil society organization called CARE, and they lost the case. Basically, that was a secular court that basically decided, no, you have to take off your burqa in order to have your driver's license. But there is no religious court, and any religious law, no matter what it is or how you justify it, will not pass any court systems in the United States anyway, because the law of the land is the law of the land. So, but in other countries, for example, you probably could get away with it, but not in Egypt, not in Turkey, and not many Muslim countries. You cannot wear burqa. It's actually out. It's banned. So
let's take another question. Maybe the other side.
Very quick comment about this claim that white people talking about women's rights is in any way imperialist. I mean, people who say that have no idea about the history of imperialism and colonialism. If we look at the Indian subcontinent, the arrangement between the British Raj and the Muslim leaders and the Hindu leaders of the subjects of the Raj was this, that white people will not be talking about your women and you are free to do anything to them. And that was the arrangement, and that is the history, how it started. The only example we see where white people are sort of claiming to go and rescue brown women is quite possibly from Afghanistan. But I would say that was an exception. Thank you.
All right, there wasn't a question there. Does anyone have a response?
Actually, imperialism, there's also imperialism of the Muslim world on Muslim as well. And somehow a lot of the left, the political left, Muslim or otherwise, seem to forget that Muslims themselves are imperialized by fellow Muslims.
Yeah. Any other quick comment there?
I would disagree, actually. I would say that the history of India, for example, under colonial times, the British always felt that they were rescuing and attempted to rescue Hindu women from sati and so on and so forth. And although there was a groundswell of political lobbying against that by the Indian community themselves, but it was part of the civilizing mission of colonialism. That was how colonialism was justified in the West. So I'm not sure. Legally.
Any other quick comment there? I think we'll go on. A question over. Oh, sorry.
Hello, my name is Azira Aziz. I'm from Malaysia. I'm part of a group of practicing Muslims who are challenging the main narrative used by political entities in order to control the mainstream power. So basically, part of the things we have done is sue the president of past whole political anti-Islamic Sharia law expansion, punitive measure bills and so forth, and then also forums. So my question is concerning advocacy tools other than what already shared that you think would be most effective in challenging mainstream narratives of a more stringent or harsher versions of Islam? Because I come from the perspective of people who are considered either progressives and also secularists, but at the same time, we are working from within the system. And what would be the most effective tools to all of you, actually? Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, can I answer that? Because you're from Malaysia, right? Yeah, okay, so I'm from Malaysia too, and we actually have a chapter there in Malaysia, and we've been under a lot of pressure from the Malaysian government. Actually, one of the co-founders has to leave Malaysia thanks to some support because of the threats that he's been getting. So what we've done in Malaysia that garnered that attack against us actually is because our support for LGBT rights and support from religious minority rights. And what we've done to work within the system is to use the Marrakesh Declaration. The Marrakesh Declaration that was signed last year by 145 religious leaders, all these male elites, is basically to finally, 1,400 years later, to come back around to say that, religious minorities have rights in Muslim-majority countries. So we actually use the Marrakesh Declaration as a shield, but that even then, we are still under attack by the Malaysian government. But to use religious edicts, unfortunately, like it or not, that is the only protection that we have working within Muslim-majority country if you're trying to challenge the religious status quo.
Halima.
Sorry, no, I didn't answer the question. I was going to ask what the actual question was.
Oh, I'm sorry. Any other quick?
I think Annie's answered the question in terms of the Malaysian context. In the UK context, we've got equalities laws, and I think we have to use those as much as we can in terms of challenging them. But there is also something about solidarity, which I think is missing. I don't think there's any other way of putting it. The whole debate around religion has fractured the women's sector within the UK, particularly as a result of the campaigning that One Law for All have been doing in terms of the Sharia courts, which I keep coming back to. And it can be very, very isolating. And we have to, I think, in terms of having our voices heard and people from within communities who are challenging, but also outside, standing together, protesting together, which we're doing, but our numbers are so small and our voices aren't heard. And if you would like to see an example of that, just watch the footage of the Home Affairs Select Committee, where only Mariam and Elham were allowed to give oral evidence. And in terms of those supporting the Sharia courts, I mean, their numbers were overwhelming. So there is such a small space for action because of the political sensitivities and also because of the privilege given to some people of religion, not necessarily all. So I think solidarity and sisterhood and coming together and raising our voices together is absolutely crucial, not just within the UK, but also cross-nationally.
Can I? Yeah. I just wanted to really reinforce the point that Yasmin's just made, because recently when we had the gender segregation court hearing, which Pragna Patel referred to in her contribution yesterday, and we tried to mobilize support from the BME women's sector. Actually, most of the supporters that came were from South All Black Sisters and One Law for All. There is a huge silence around the issue of religion in the BME sector, and it relates back to the earlier question of whether people think it is imperialistic to take on the issue of Muslim women's rights, and a lot of the BME sector are completely quiet about this. So yeah, I support that thing about call for solidarity.
So I think we have a question there and then there.
Yeah, Nadia Alfani, Tunisian and French filmmaker. I want to remind you something. In Tunisia we used to forbidden the veil in the street because it was the dictatorship. And it was a law forbidding the veil also in the institutions, like in France, like in Turkey. It was called, for that, Tunisia was called like laicity country, but we were not. And first of all, the Islamists, after revolution, they start to ask for the freedom for the women. The men ask for the women, the freedom to wear the veil in the street. and after they ask for the freedom, the woman to wear the veil as professor, and after for the students at the university. And now you have like children 2 years old, 3 years old at school wearing the veil in Tunisia and also in France. In Paris now you can see all families where the women wearing the veil, because it's not forbidden to wear the veil in the street in Paris. Not like I heard a lot of time, you know, the veil it's forbidden in France. It's not true. It's only the niqab. It means the entire veil, you know, who cover the face. But and now in the street in Paris, you can find families walking in the street with little children, you know, girls wearing the veil, 2 years old, 3 years old. So I'm okay for the freedom of, you know, to wear what you want in the street. Okay, but, you know, this kind of, how do you say, clothes, it's not clothes, it's like uniform, you know, because it's something like, how do you say, it's something like imposed by the Islamists. It's not the Muslim, you know, it's not the Quran. I don't care about what Quran said or not, but the political Muslims who wants to impose the law of the Islam religion everywhere on the earth, you know, they impose the woman to wear the veil, and they start with the freedom of children of 2 years old.
Thank you. I think we're going to go to that question.
Hi. I think a lot of the things that what I'm going to say is just reinforcing what the women on the panel have said, about this double standard. But actually, I've got maximum respect for so many of the women on the panel, especially Yasmin. She's amazing. You know, she actually outright says that there is an issue with Islam. But Annie, I've got to, I guess, pull you up on this, because the issue of women's rights within Islam, those that say that it has nothing to do with my version of Islam, well, I just don't care about that. I just don't care about that. We need more Muslim women like Yasmin to say that there is an issue with Islam. I mean, I'm astounded that you could sit there and say that there's no mention of apostasy in the Quran. The Quran mentions apostasy 3 times, and out of those 3 times, twice it mentions punishment and chastisement, as well as Muhammad then going on and saying 8 times in the hadith that elaborating what punishments should be dished out to apostates. That is there. Denying that is a huge problem, and actually you're feeding into those activists that are standing there saying Islam is a religion of peace. Muslims don't do any harm to anybody, don't harm women.
So do I get a chance to respond or not?
Yes.
So, I actually didn't say there was no problem with Islam. I actually give solutions to the problems. So I don't dwell on negations. I don't dwell on problems, because we all know there's a lot of bloody problems in the Muslim world. I mean, look at it. It's a disaster. Why do you think it's a disaster? Obviously, it's not a religion of peace, because if it is peaceful, then there would be peace in the Middle East or throughout the Muslim world, Malaysia included. So I think you need to listen to me carefully. And so if you're going to talk about apostasy, I'm not just saying that it doesn't exist, there's no punishment, but if the religious authorities of Morocco can actually, from what I just said, so maybe we should educate ourselves a little bit and actually get beyond the framing that we've all been indoctrinated with, myself included. So that's lesson number 1. In regards to Tunisia, we are so naive, okay? These Islamists, they think long term. Lefties, secularists, are so stupid about their short-term gains. Ghanouchi came back from the UK, as you alluded to yesterday, and basically said, okay, we were in power, and all the secularists came, all the feminist organization came and demonstrated, and they conceded. They gave up their political power. But what did they say? What did Ghanouchi say? He went to Egypt, and he said, in Arabic, it says, okay, Tunisians are not ready for Sharia law yet, but in 10, 15 years, their children will be ready. And what do? We just sit back. And we still talk about secularism as the solution. This is the problem. We, MPV, advocate for secularism in the Muslim world, okay? We are Muslim, but we thank you for saying this earlier. Just because we're Muslim does not mean that we don't advocate for secularism in public, in policy, in public law. But we need to be smart and strategic about how we counter the Islamist agenda, because they have been very powerful and very strategic. Look at Morsi. Look at all the Muslim world. Look at the politicians. Look at how Saudi Arabia has used the OIC in propagating its Wahhabism, even here in the United States, in the schools here. Wake up. Be strategic.
So I know there's some other responses.
Yes, actually, I wanted to answer this woman in blue here who was talking about the veil in Paris. I wanted to answer her point. My father was a member of what you might call a hard-right Islamist missionary organization. And he described a long plan that they had of 100 or 150 years duration to bring the entire world under Sharia law. And having thought about it and having watched the world unfold for a few decades now, I think it's working. You know, I think they're actually winning. And in my home country, in the UK, I can be attacked for criticizing Islam as if it was the only religion that mattered. But my right to protection and to self-determination is not defended with equal vigor. So laws and ideas that would have once been considered beyond reason are now being discussed as elements of the fabric of our society. And so it's my perception that things aren't actually getting better, that things are actually getting worse. And it's the first time that I've come forward in my life as an apostate and as an ex-Muslim. And that's the reason why I'm here today. I think that we have to join together to understand that this is actually a battle that we're losing.
I just wanted to mention that point about the lesson in reframing our kind of idea of what Islam is in terms of also how we treat apostates and, you know, the version that you are trying to promote and also becoming the predominant kind of version of Islam. However, the problem is at the moment we don't have that, because that is not the version that we are fighting against right now. So I don't know how that is helpful right now in the fight that we have, because in London, I mean, my family are very religious Islamists, and, you know, how do I go tell them about reformed Islam? To them, that's just ridiculous. So I don't know how it's helpful in this climate, for us in London at least. I don't know, I guess there is another whole issue here where ex-Muslims and apostates, even reformed Muslims, what we're facing in this country is very different from what Muslim majority, Muslim country people are facing. So I don't know how we can use that lesson in our current predicament.
Sorry, I just want to say, I think that women here face things that are very similar to what women in Muslim majority countries face, because we live in such closed communities and societies. I mean, my father was born in Pakistan. When I rejected Islam, he told me that he was going to make me dig my own grave and bury me alive. And that's in the West. My mother wasn't allowed to use the phone unsupervised. Something that I think maybe a few people in this room are familiar with. And this is an adult in the West. So I think that what happens is that these communities get transplanted and they bring their values with them, and women suffer as much as they do in Muslim majority countries. I don't think that you can draw that distinction, because I think that it marginalizes the women who are fighting hard right Islam in the West right now. But sorry, I mean that's. my point of view.
No, I don't completely disagree with you, but I think what I was trying to say is that the cost is, to some extent, a little bit higher because they actually can be killed here. I mean, I guess, in my experience, a lot of ex-Muslims who don't come out, for example, because they're afraid of ostracization, they're afraid of abuse, probably they're afraid of being assaulted, but it's not death threats. There's a slight difference there.
My father sentenced me to death when I was 15 years old, and we lived in Ottawa.
Can I say something?
You
I think
know?
the fact that you defined your parents as religious in that regard is already a problem, because
that's what they are.
No, because I'm sorry, but I just think that if you are oppressive, and I find my definition of religion or spirituality is not based on how religious or dogmatic you are. My definition of being religious is being someone who's spiritual and inclusive and loving and compassionate. And
the
that
Quran
is,
isn't.
I know, but the thing is, when you give religious people, or to define religion in such an oppressive way, you give them the power. And it's really about definition. For me, it's about ethics. And so if you're not ethical, then you're not religious.
I think
sorry,
no, go ahead.
Can I come in?
It's not just your parents, but in general.
No, I think it's all well and good trying to redefine Islam, but it is what it is.
No, it's not just Islam, it's all religions.
Well, you know, we hear that about Christianity too.
Yeah.
You can't be, if you're good, you must be Christian. If you're bad, you can't be Christian.
Can I just say that I don't think part of the title of this was religious morality. Morality, compassion, ethics, values, empathy, sympathy are not qualities that are limited to believers or non-believers. We all have them to some degree. They cut across whether you're a believer or not. I think what Annie said about being strategic is really, really important. I'm not an Islamic scholar. I started off when I started doing my research, decades ago now, and my work around violence against women and girls within BME communities actually looking at religious texts. And it's not a route that I've gone down, but I absolutely salute the women and some of the men who were doing this work. You know, they opened up a world to me, like Fatima Manissi, her work, Keisha Ali, the things that Annie have done. There is a space within those communities to open up some conversations. We have to try and take that space in order to get our messages around equality and human rights across. But also we've got to be careful of not tarnishing every Muslim family as being regressive and oppressive. I just want to tell you about my own family very quickly. I have 5 siblings. 3 of us still identify as Muslims to various degrees of practice. 3 of them are ex-Muslims. We can hold ourselves together. They have been able to say that within our family and extended family. And for my mother, who is a devout Muslim, to be able to defend her ex-Muslim children. So not every Muslim family is threatening to kill their daughters. There are those of us within the community who stand up and challenge and face the same death threats and the same labels of apostasy as Halima and Mariam and Sadia and other women and men around this room face. But please do not tarnish everyone within a particular community as being these kind of moronic beings who lack rationale, because you're actually doing the Islamist work for them. When they say that we're being targeted and isolated, it's what Rahila said. Don't give the Islamists any space. Let's try and be strategic and open up those spaces for those who want to have the discussion around scripture and an alternative reading of the Quran. Allow them to have that. For those who can come into spaces like this, like me, feel a bit uncomfortable at times, but actually really welcomed and warmed and connected at others, then that works. But whatever works to dismantle and destroy what is being done in the name of a religion that does give some people some solace,
So I
we have
think
to work together.
we've only got 5 minutes left. In fairness, I'm sorry. In fairness to the panel, I'll give you each 1 final minute.
I just wanted to shift the focus a little bit away from the individual practice of religion to just draw attention to the idea of the growth of institutionalized religion and religious ideologies around the world, and to talk about what might not seem to be connected at all, but there is an arms fair taking place in September in London, and the war in Turkey and the war in Yemen begins in London, and it reinforces Erdogan, it reinforces the Saudi form of Wahhabism, and we need also to make common cause with those sorts of issues, because that's partly the way in which these things are being institutionalized, making the fight harder, because it's actually at a level which is, at state level, and that needs to be challenged as well.
Okay, thank you. Sadia?
Sorry.
Sadia, closing statement, 1 minute.
Oh, closing statement. Well, thank you very much for having me here today and for listening. I think that it's a Gordian knot. I think it's an incredibly challenging problem, and but I think that it's essential that we approach it by looking at the ideas that these things represent, and challenging it on a level of ideas, because from where I sit, everything to do with the veil is just the home of bad ideas, and I hope that instead of losing as much as I feel that we have been, we can actually start winning again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Yasmin, 1 minute.
Thank you for having me as part of the panel. There has got to be a space to challenge ideas. I think Ina kind of said it much better than I ever could. But let's try and connect with each other as human beings. We have to do that where we all matter. I think that's a place that I would like to get to. I know that the struggle is hard and it can feel like we're losing, but actually look around this room. Look at how many people here are gathered. Look at the fact the Council of Ex-Muslims, despite all the challenges that they face individually and collectively, are celebrating 10 years. Look at the fact that in the One Law for All coalition, we've got people of all hues. The diversity of that group, not just in terms of belief and non-belief, but also racial diversity, is incredible. We're much, much stronger together, to quote Jo Cox. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just first thing, I think there was a misuse of language. I didn't mean to say my parents are Islamists. They're religious, very religious, but not Islamists. Some relatives are, but anyways. Apart from that, I just want to say 11 years ago I left Islam, and I didn't think it would be possible to have such a big gathering and speak here, so I'm really happy to do that today. Thank you, Mariam, for making it possible. And I think I do agree, yes, we need to have discussions, and I guess myself included, we need to be prepared to be challenged and have difficult discussions, and maybe there'll be a lot of heated discussions as well, but it's necessary, and our thoughts have to be challenged as well. So I do agree we need to do that. By making proper change, though, we need to have more protests, more dialogues, more confrontation. I think it always starts at home, though. Start with your family, like I did. I know a lot of ex-Muslims did, and then you're given confidence to go out as well and do so. Small incremental steps make a long way to transform society. So, good luck.
So I'd like to end on some positive movements that's going around in the world. We have an initiative called Imams for She, and in Burundi we work with 26 imams that actually coach and work with young women on about their rights in Islam and their right to work and not marry young and all that good stuff. So there's some really good works that's been happening on the ground in the smallest villages in Tunisia and what have you, in encountering misogyny and in promoting pluralism. And so that's really key. And there's also this global convening of progressive and like-minded Muslims that's happening in Tunisia in the end of September. And it's a global convening of organizations from Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Latin America. Everyone is fighting radicalism in the Muslim community. So just take note of that. I want you to take note of that. Muslims are sick and tired of radicalism. It undermines all our human rights abuses. Women, LGBT, free thinkers, atheists, everyone.
Thank all of our panelists, and I'll leave you with a favorite quote of mine by Hypatia Bradlaugh Bonner: "Heresy makes for progress."